Hello and welcome to the Reset Show, episode number 15. Today's theme is lessons from CX and UX, or customer experience and user experience, to give them their full titles. And we have a double A side for you today on the show, for those of you who remember the good old days of vinyl. And not one, but two special guests are spoiling us by joining us to share their experience. We're delighted to welcome Kerrie Hughes and Paul Bailey from leading global design and innovation consultancy Sparck. More from Kerrie and Paul in a moment. A quick 10-second bio for Paul, who is the head of design at Sparck. Over 20 years experience in creating innovative solutions with some of the world's best known brands and organizations. Paul loves solving human-centered problems with design thinking, technological insight, and a little bit of magic. You'll like it, not a lot, but you'll like it. There's another 80s reference for the older viewers. Finally, Paul is, to my mind, the first person to call himself a design thinking dad. So welcome to Paul. And a 10-second bio for Kerrie, service designer at Sparck, and most importantly, a contributor to the recently published, destined to be a best-selling book, EX by Design. You know who you are. Kerrie is passionate about the importance of customer-led design that considers the entire customer journey, ensuring a solution that combines CX and UX best practice. So a perfect person to join us today. Before I hand you over to Emma and B to get this party started, let me say a big thank you, as always, to our producer, Katie, and my co-hosts, Emma and B, our live studio guests who have joined us today for the recording. Hello to you. And of course, to you, whether you are watching this show on YouTube or listening to the podcast, you are all very welcome. That's all from me. I'm going to hand over to Emma now to give you a bit of a refresh as to what the Reset Show is all about. Over to you, Emma.
Thank you, Justin. Hello, everybody. So going to just give you a little bit of background as to what the Reset Show is all about, and continuing the theme of records, starting to feel like a broken record, see what I did there. But I'm mindful that there are people who have joined us for the first time who might not know what this is all about. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of background. So the Reset Show has been going for many months now. I think you said it's show 15, Justin. And we decided to start the Reset Show to really bring together a brilliant guests, like-minded network of people who want to use the opportunity of COVID to make the world of work better for people. And that's in a nutshell. That's what we're here to do. We have brilliant conversations every fortnight. We have fantastic guests. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to B to get the party started. Over to you, B.
Thank you. I'm going to get the party started. Yeah, we're all about human-centered design thinking, creativity, innovation. So that's what we're going to be focusing on. So yeah, really delighted to have Paul and Kerrie here. As Justin said, Kerrie was a contributor to our book on employee experience by design, and in the book we draw a lot with pride from design thinking, so it's really great to sort of delve a little bit more into that and to explore some of the links and the opportunities, things that we can borrow from the world of customer experience and land into the world of employee experience and culture and people and all that good stuff in organizations. So Paul, I think I'll come to you first, if I might. Just give us a little potted history of Sparck. Tell us a little bit more about the business.
Sure, yeah, thanks, Belinda. Well, great intro from Justin. Thanks. That's best intro I've had so far, I think. Thank you. Yeah, so Sparck, we're a leading global design and innovation consultancy, but we're part of a much bigger organization called BJSS. And BJSS are the largest independent IT consultancy in the UK. And Sparck are essentially the design arm of BJSS, where I think 70 plus now designers across strategy, research, product design, service design, and content designers. And we work with people like NHS and the Met Office, ITV, Amnesty International, to help them really harness the power of digital technology in new ways.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. Kerrie, I'm going to come over to you. I know that until relatively recently, you were in financial services. So Tell us, I'm kind of projecting, I guess, a little bit here about what that experience from financial services to full-on cool design agencies like. But tell us a little bit about that journey.
So yeah, I've spent the last 5+ years in financial services. Strangely, it's a very exciting place to be, and we've got the challenger banks to sort of thank for that, because they really have turned the way banking had to consider what it does on its head. So it's been a really exciting time. But you know, there are sort of challenges of being in a big financial institution around sort of legacy systems, silos, you know, all that good stuff, the internal politics and regulation, whilst it's a great thing, right? None of us are ever going to be against regulation. It's really fantastic, but from a design perspective, you've then got to make that work for the customer. We coined a phrase called positive friction, which is really important in banking, and it's all about, okay, it's okay to have systems two thinking, which is where when we're making decisions, we have to slow down and we have to think about things. And that was really how we could feel good about putting terms and conditions and legal documents in front of people, knowing that they just often just tick past them. We all do it. We all shouldn't, but we do. But hey. And then, yeah, I think my move into consultancy was really, I was acutely aware of moving between organizations, that when you start in an organization, what you have is this amazing fresh pair of eyes, this outside in thinking. You're energized, you haven't got the baggage of the organization at that point that comes with spending years in the same organization. And I could really recognize that moving to a consultancy and a design agency was going to always afford me that new perspective, and bringing that into organizations, being able to really see things clearly, you know, and really bring that outside in thinking. And it's been amazing that the transition, you know, I've been with Sparck since the beginning of the year. I've, you know, onboarded remotely, but to work in an organization where you're surrounded by other designers is just amazing. You know, if I've got a question, I know, I'll take to Slack and ask someone, because someone will know. And it's the community, the design community is amazing in that way. So it's been really good so far.
Fantastic. Wow, what a time to start a new job. I'm always in awe of people who have done that in the last year. It's like, wow, what is that even like? Thank you. So we've already talked about, well, we've sort of thrown around this expression, design thinking. Now, design thinking is kind of like an iteration, if you like, of human-centered design, but that in itself is just a bunch of words that can be a bit amorphous and difficult to get your head around. So I was wondering if you could both give us a take on what you mean by human-centered design, and where it delivers and where it doesn't. Kerry, I'll ask you first. I'm sorry, Paul.
No, I think that there's something interesting in that question. I think me and Kerry, we've spent quite a lot of time trying to think about where it doesn't work. And we actually really struggled to think about instances where it didn't work. We did come up with something in the end, but Kerry, why don't you give us your definition of human-centered design first, and we can move on to that.
Yeah, okay. So, you know, for me, I've had a journey. I started in CX in 2001, and I've had a journey along there. It was always very based on the person, on the customer, and I think that's the real nugget in human-centered design. Is it absolutely starts with the people and finishes with the people you're designing for. Now, we work in business environments, and so of course we need to layer that with feasibility and business and their strategy and objectives, but it's all about starting the process and designing around that customer with lots of tools and techniques that enable you to sort of do that. So it's really putting them at the front and center of the design.
Thank you. I'd love to know where it doesn't work.
I guess coming on to kind of my view of human-centered design, I often think about 4 key things. And if you want to really simplify it, firstly, it's about really understanding the problem. What's the problem that you're trying to solve? And then it's about understanding the people in terms of who they are, where they are, the context they're doing things. And then it's about the system in which everything kind of operates. And then ultimately, it's about designing in an iterative way. It's about taking a non-standard kind of waterfall model where you go away and write a specification for 6 months and then present your ta-da, and actually doing something small, very kind of and quick, and actually getting feedback really early on. And I think that's the key kind of principle around human-centered design is around those four things. One other way I often describe it is for me, human-centered design is about making things better for people on purpose. So it's about making conscious decisions about what it is that you're doing based on people's needs and including them in the actual process. And I think that, again, that inclusion of people is really key.
It's interesting, isn't it? It sounds so, well, of course, this is what human-centered design is, but isn't this what everybody does anyway? Why is it even a thing? It must be difficult, or it wouldn't be a thing. If we're not doing human-centered design, what sort of design are we doing?
Well, I mean, from my personal experience, being in design for like 20 years, it's only really since I've joined Sparck, and I've been there just over 3 years, that I've found somewhere that really believes in human-centered design approach and an agile approach, so that they're actually, in companies I've worked in the past, you'd be given a brief and there's a problem to solve. And what you'd expect to do is go away, come with loads of ideas, and then you perhaps present 3 to the client, and then they choose one, and then you go and build it and deliver it, and then users would get to use it at the end. And this process could take 6 months on a large technical project, and you'd have a team creating this design spec of 500 pages defining how this solution was going to work that a client would never read. And then we'd produce something and then wonder why people didn't enjoy using it. And I've worked in those kind of environments where that's seen as like a safe way, because you can predict how much that design spec is going to cost to produce, and you can predict how much that piece of software is going to be to develop. Whereas when you get into kind of an agile environment, from a stakeholder perspective, that can be less clear at the start, and it's perceived as having perhaps more risk around it.
And I think the design that happens when it isn't human-centered and can still be perceived as customer-centric, but I kind of call it assumptive design. I've been employed many times by organizations to be the customer, and I sit there and I can, I'll do my best, acutely aware that I'm not the user, and we'll collaborate internally, but it's very assumptive, and lots of organizations are good at having research and having stuff that makes them good at those assumptions and making those assumptions, but they're still assumptions, and you can still go a long way down the track and go, oh, we didn't get that right.
Yes, that's so interesting. As you say, so many organizations have been spending so much money on research, whether that's customer research or employee research, for an awfully long period of time, but that is not the same thing as doing human-centered design. There's a missing bit there somewhere, isn't there? And is that where this idea of the discovery phase comes in? Is what sits between, if the gap, I love your phrase, Kerry, assumptive design, but what sits between them? We've got loads of data, let's create something. What do you do differently in that gap? And I think it's something to do with discovery, so tell us a little bit more about that and why it matters.
Shall I pick that up, Kerry?
Yeah, go for it.
I guess from my perspective is it's making sure that you understand the needs of the users. So you've obviously got the business need. Business needs to do something, but is there a desirability to actually solve that problem? And is that problem something that is viable? Can you actually solve it? And more often than not, I think, at least organizations that I've worked with in the past, they have a lot of assumptions about what they believe is needed. So, in an HR context, maybe they decide that, we need a new induction. Okay, well, we're going to get this company that specializes in creating inductions to go and create one for us. And they don't actually then spend the time understanding what's actually needed from a user perspective and what's actually missing. I think for me, the discovery part is looking at those assumptions in a lot closer detail and actually trying to understand the core problem rather than going with the assumptions that you've got to actually go ahead and build something or create a new experience.
Yeah, and to sort of add to that, one of the reasons that I kind of looked to Sparck when I saw the job advert and got excited about it was knowing the importance of discovery, and it can be quite hard in an organization to get them to spend time on discovery, and I'm gonna pull out a quote here from Einstein, because it's where I always go, and no one can argue with Einstein, right? And he says there's two quotes, right? And I'll do this one first. Any fool can know, the point is to understand. So let's take that as our starting point. And then the second one that he has, that he's quoted to say is, if I had to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about solutions. And I think that really sums up what you're doing in the discovery space, right? So one of the biggest things that I had to train myself to do, and I have when I do workshops with people, I really help them to do, is don't go to solutions, right? Because people have a habit of saying the problem straight to the solution. Oh, it's difficult because, we could do this. And it's like, no, we won't allow ourselves. We won't do that yet. We're just going to absorb it all, immerse, really understand the problems, and then we can go to solutions.
It's so interesting that you say that, Kerry, because I know obviously we work with people teams in all their guises, not necessarily customer teams, but absolutely we see that as the trajectory, which is that's wrong. Oh, let's do this. And it's that lack of willing. And I always wonder whether it's because it's the sort of people that we work with. It tends to be very action orientated people, or people who are, it was the nature of the function, which is there's a problem, solve it for me right now. So they jump to that. But it does sound like maybe it's just human nature to jump to the solution rather than pause and sit in that problem space and that discovery space for longer.
Yeah, we have a phrase at Spark, and we call it, we're standing in the squiggle. So I don't know if you're familiar with the design squiggle, but that squiggly bit is quite uncomfortable. And initially our first reaction is to solve the problem. And often that's where we then end up jumping to assumptions and maybe not creating the best solution.
I'm going to throw a really unkind, it's not a question, it's a thought to Emma. It's almost like coaching, isn't it? It's like, resisting telling somebody what to do versus helping them find that. There feels like a parallel there. I don't know if it's a useful comment or not.
Definitely sit on your hands. Justin obviously is also a coach in the room, but yeah, definitely. It's tempting to fix things for people, isn't it? So I think that's
yeah.
It's interesting actually what you're saying there, Paul, because we had this very conversation just this morning, didn't we, B? And I'd really love to explore with you guys being customer experience and user experience experts, what we can learn and apply to EX, because EX is like way behind you guys in terms of maturity, and we're just starting the journey. And I think really prompted by the piece that Kerry did for the book, which was brilliant, around just really challenging people in employee experience, that Kerry's point about when you're researching, when you're gathering insight from a customer experience point of view, it's actually you've got to put quite a lot of legwork in to find customers and bring them in. It's expensive and it's hard work. Whereas when you're designing employee experiences, we've got like direct access to all of our people. So why are we so lazy about doing that? And why does that feel so difficult? So kind of just a few points in there just to kind of clarify that, really. So that's really interesting for me, that piece around what we can learn from your disciplines from an EX point of view, and also maybe one for our guests today. I want to know why we are not better in organizations at really doing that discovery piece, because there's a lot of resistance to it, and we work with so many clients that really resist the discovery scoping piece. No, just get straight to the point. I know we've got research, we've got an employee survey data, we've got some demographics, that will do. We have to really work to convince them to do proper insight and research work. It's really hard work. So sorry, a bit of a ramble there, but the first question really is, what can we learn from you guys in the world of EX?
I guess
Yeah, go on, Paul. Sorry.
I mean, I guess some of the challenges that you've got there is that they're not new to us. So some clients will say, oh, it's going to be time consuming and expensive, right? And actually, I'm under pressure. We need to deliver this thing quick. Or you've got somebody that's really excited about this great idea that they've had. And they're kind of seeing the research bit as a bit of a luxury. That's kind of maybe something that they can't kind of afford. And sometimes I think people just convince themselves that they know enough and they're ready to start. But I think it's important to kind of take a step back, because before you commit to building a new product or experience or a service, you really need to understand that problem to be solved. Because I think if you don't have that in-depth knowledge and understanding, you're at risk of actually building the wrong thing. And I think a lot of stakeholders, if you shift the conversation from discovery and start talking about risk and costs, then suddenly the discovery doesn't seem quite as expensive as it first did when you first started to discuss it. I think IBM does some really interesting research, and this is perhaps related more towards software development, but their System Science Institute found that fixing code after it had gone live cost up to 100 times more than if they'd have fixed it at the design stage. So if you start to pull out some statistics like that, it helps to kind of facilitate that conversation to say, oh, actually, you know what, if we just rush in and we implement this new change that's going to go across the whole business, what's the impact if we get it wrong? What's the negative side? You know, how difficult is it going to be to change later on? So maybe then, you know, if you talk about it in terms of risk, I think stakeholders in particular, they start to listen a little bit more.
Yeah. And my experience is I was once gifted, I was working for a building society, and I was gifted this period to pull a design team together. We were building a whole new IT platform, right? So just building the whole lot from scratch. And whilst we kind of got the team set up, I was gifted with this period of discovery, pulling a design team together, really understanding customers. I mean, we were using a lot of sort of secondhand research, but you know, you can do that sometimes. But we spent a good amount of time, 20 employees from across the building society. We had a day at the Principality Stadium in Cardiff, and we did a workshop mapping the as-is of the savings journey, the digital savings journey. And it was completely, you know, and then we took it back to the office and we put it on the wall, and we had all these personas that we were developing, and we had all this amazing stuff just stuck to the walls, and called it our customer room. And then we brought in all the IT team, all the solution architects and enterprise architects, all the directors, all the exco, and then finally we brought in the non-execs, right? So it was really every top down came and they saw this, and the impact of it was absolutely amazing. So from my experience, there's things that people love to be able to sort of talk about, and that's to talk about the customers or the people that are being designed for in a factual way. And, you know, doing discovery actually meant that when questions were thrown at us, when left of center requests came, we could quickly look at the data, look at the customer room, look at what we'd understood, and everyone was on the same page. And, you know, we could quash a lot of those sort of distractions that inevitably happen. So it saves a lot of time doing it as well.
Thank you both. This is a nice springboard into one of the questions that's been coming up in the chat, because I know Paul and Kerry have been focused on talking. So there was two strands of questioning. Let me come to the second strand first, because that's sparking some discussion amongst the live studio audience. So it was prompted by Sarah, who asked for top tips on how you keep your stakeholders warm and feeling progress when keeping in the discovery stage, so that you stay in the squiggle. We've had some thoughts from Anita, says obvious, yes, but involving them and their people, of course, especially any folks who they keep close and trust. And I think further down as well, we had Megan was saying sometimes also thinks there's a fear of asking customers or employees for their feedback or involving them in the process. Sometimes because of a perception that doing so will cause customers or employees to perceive the business as not being knowledgeable or expert. They don't think they should have to ask, they think they should just know already. And other times it's that they're afraid of what they'll hear and not knowing how they'll respond to that feedback. Let's come to Paul first for your thoughts on this question.
I think it's a good question. There's a lot of elements to it, so I'm going to tackle one at a time. I think firstly, I think Anita talks about involving them, and I think that's key. And that's not always easy. You know, sometimes you've got a stakeholder who's not particularly available and hasn't got a lot of time to give. One of the things that we've done, I guess, a number of times is actually involve them in the early stages. So actually persuade them to come along to a workshop and actually hear firsthand from the users about their experience. And often in the early phases of discovery, we would kind of focus a bit more heavily on that qualitative type of research. And we're looking for kind of stories and messages to come out that we can share with stakeholders that help to kind of buy into the story of transformation. Later on, we kind of move into more kind of quantitative data kind of phase of research. But really early on, we want to try and bring those stories to life and share them with stakeholders on a really regular basis. The way that we work is usually in a kind of sprint cycle, which is a kind of 2-week block usually. And in that 2 weeks, we're delivering something, we're delivering value. So we're not disappearing for 6 months and then coming back and saying, ta-da! We're doing some kind of playback on a regular basis with those key stakeholders to keep them in the loop about the direction of the project that's going and sharing the insights as we actually go along. And most of the time that works really well, particularly I think if you can use different media to tell those stories. So if you can use video, you can use imagery, you can use proper kind of storytelling to bring these pain points to life. I think that really helps to hit home.
Yeah, that sounds very helpful. Thanks, Paul. So as much as possible, getting those stakeholders involved early on so that they get some insight and also some ownership, I suppose, of the process. And then I really like this the way of using stories to communicate the process in these short bursts, because of course, who can resist a good story? And of course, using various media to get that across. What about you, Kerry? What are your thoughts on this sometimes tricky topic?
Yeah, well, I think I'll pick up on Megan's point, because I think it's a really good one, and I think this perception around, if you need to ask, are you the expert in the room, right? And as a CX service designer, as working as a consultant, right, you have to be really comfortable with knowing that what you're doing is you're facilitating others, right, in gathering all of this information. And you know, you have to be really comfortable with knowing that you're not the expert in the room, but you're the expert of getting the experts to pass on their wisdom, and you'll pull all that together. You know, you will synthesize that stuff. You know, and flattery gets you a long way, you know, in with stakeholders and SMEs, as we call them, our subject matter experts. You know, they really do know a lot. And you learn the ones in an organization, and this isn't always the ones that are most vocal or stuff, but you'll learn in an organization, and this is the benefit of being in-house, is that you learn who is good at this stuff, right? Because not everybody is. Asking some people to go to a workshop and imagine that they don't know all the processes that they know, and to be the customer and to, you know, to forget all that stuff. I know that you do that in your day-to-day job, but can you just park that at the door, right? For some people, that is a big ask, okay? And for others, it's really simple. You need a good cross-section, you need it to be diverse, you know, and inclusive and all those good things, but, you know, use those people and embrace the fact that what you're doing is these people are providing that expertise, and that is how you will design a good experience.
That's I'm I'm thinking about the connections that are back to actually humans themselves and how humans communicate. I've been making some notes as you've been talking, because one of the things that we like to do on the show is have a dual focus. So we talk about organizations, so the topic through an organization perspective, and then we also like to talk about it through a personal perspective. So because our viewers are mixed, some people are work in this area and some people work in other areas. And one of the things that strikes me is, to pick up on Belinda's point earlier about coaching, is, and I'm going to nick this one from you, Kerry, thank you, positive friction. Because that is something that I see all the time with leaders, all the time, that they've to a large extent survived on their wits, on their system one thinking, you know, that ability to make those calls quickly, and slowing them down and engaging that system two thinking is really uncomfortable for them. Like you say, they don't like it. Experts, or people who are good at doing things and perceive that that's why they're paid, find it very uncomfortable. So it might be a subject that they're not knowledgeable about, but more interesting, I think, it's people. Is we can't possibly know about other people, so we have to engage some positive friction in there to slow down and to really embrace that squiggle. You know, when you're working with people, that's where you need to spend most of your time, isn't it? I mean, there's so many connections in terms of questioning the assumptions you make. So, well, how do you question the assumptions you make about people? Well, you have the conversations with them, and it's only in the actual conversations with the real people, which is similar to what you're saying about, you have to actually talk to the real customer. There's no use, talking to someone who's a bit like them or has a good idea. So I am a magpie. So I've collected things over the course of these reset shows. And the one from the last one was champagne test, which is this lovely thing of, I think you were there, Kerry, but like, try it out on yourself. And if you like it, well, then try it out on others. It's that thing of, well, if you want to decide what champagne to buy, so try one yourself. I mean, well, that's nice. Just, try it out on yourself. So this one today is positive friction. I don't want to ramble off too much, but I thought it was interesting for the listeners who are particularly focused on a personal angle, that there's so much that we can take from what you're sharing about organizations and apply it back to humans. And it feels to me like what we're describing is organizations' preference for things to be binary. So it's either this or this. It comes from our human preference, doesn't it? We don't like being in a way. We like it. It's either one thing or another. So what we're doing is finding ways of playfully inviting people to spend some time in the grey. B, back over to you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I've kind of spotted an interesting tension in this, which I probably won't explain very well. So I totally agree with everything you said, and finding it really fascinating. And there's two sort of contrasting data points here, which I know both to be true, but I can't resolve them. So let me try and explain. One, which is standing in the squiggle, is deeply uncomfortable, because as humans, we don't like not to know. So we want to rush to solutions. So that's one data point. The other data point is the fact that taking this design thinking approach, human-centered design approach, and involving collaborators is deeply viral in the best sense of the word, in that people really love being part of the process. And I'm sure Darden Business School's Jean Ledker and her research about how, and Anita, thank you, you've reflected on this as well in the chat, about how people love being part of the process, and how actually the more people you can get involved in the design process, it becomes viral and people start adopting some of this approach in their own work as well. There seem to be two contrasting data points. One, which is it's really uncomfortable. The other one, which is people love it and they want to do more of it. What's missing?
Well, I'll quickly pick up from my experience is when you're involving people, it's quite an easy ask, right? So tell me about your experience. Yeah, let's map this out. Let's think about the stages you're going through, even though, sometimes if I think specifically about customer experience mapping, I'm asking them to take their business hat on and put their customer hat on. The uncomfortable part I think, is for designers designing it and not knowing, right? And we say all the time in this job, when you're doing this, when you're doing design thinking, when you have to get uncomfortable, you have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? And when I learned that, it's really, really, really valid. It's okay that I'm feeling like I know nothing and I'm never going to be able to get to the end of this. Oh my God, I'm out of my depth. I'm overwhelmed. It's absolutely okay, because time and time again, actually, you get there, right? Because you just break it down. And, you know, I've been thinking about the squiggle, and actually, when I think about myself in the squiggle, I'm just looping round and round and round and round, and round for quite a lot. And then I'm kind of there, and I might loop round again a bit later. And that's absolutely fine, because if I get new data, if I get new insight, that's good. So I think the uncomfortable part is probably for the designer and for the stakeholders, for those more senior stakeholders, right, who've got a lot at stake. And we have to remember that, which is why involving them in the process and giving them the confidence in the process is really important. But for the people that you're engaging along the way that are subject matter experts, you know, in the instance of employee experience, who've just been onboarded, who are having a nightmare with, you know, some aspect of of the colleague experience, you know, it's just real for them actually, and it's really therapeutic for them to go to a space and to be listened to. The thing you have to be really careful with is that, and this is where stuff can go wrong. Paul and I, when we were talking about where human-centered design sometimes can't work and stuff, and that's if you just keep asking, right? You just keep doing the surveys, you just keep collecting the same insight over and over again and do very little with that. So people get fatigued by collaborating and doing the input when there's never or little output.
That's, yeah. I think it's Lindsay Bousman, who's one of another contributor in the book. She talks about not turning herself into an arsehole.
I love that.
I might be misattributing it, but it's just a fabulous one. Brilliant. So, Paul, I'd love to know, what about this idea of human-centered design going viral? Because, you know, people participate. Jean Ledger talks about it being almost like a form of change management in itself. So yes, you're working on a problem or working on realizing an opportunity, but actually you're creating change, you're changing the ways of working in the process. Do you see that happen?
Yeah, I mean, over the last year, well, what year are we in now? Last year, we worked on a really big project with the Driving and Vehicle Standards Agency, and they're responsible for ensuring road safety in the UK, and they conduct all the practical and theory tests across the UK. And the challenge that we had was taking a paper-based service, which was probably, I don't know, I mean, I took my driving test a long time ago and the service was exactly the same. It had not changed in like, I don't know, 25 years or so. And the audience there's about 1,800 driving examiners that are based across the UK. And about 1 in 6 are aged 50 plus and scored themselves fairly lowly on the digital inclusion scale, and were fairly resistant to change, you know, early on. And we took a kind of co-creative approach right from the start, and we did a number of things really. Firstly, we started with an experience. So we recreated a driving test centre in our office in Nottingham. We got the key stakeholders there. We got the whole of the project team. And we recreated the end-to-end driving test experience. We had a video of a real driving test. We got some Wii steering wheels, and we got people to actually conduct the test as almost like as a bit of performance. It was like a bit of drama in front of the whole team. And we also enabled the whole team to actually go out and meet driving examiners. So they actually got to meet the users. So they might have been developing software, or they might have never had any contact with users otherwise. So we actually took them to a driving test centre where they sat on a live test with a candidate and had the opportunity to actually meet and talk to users. Not long after that, we got something out. So we shipped an app to them within about 2 months. So within about 2 months, driving examiners had a kind of prototype app that they could start looking at and experimenting with. We knew it wasn't perfect. We knew There was a lot of things that needed to be improved. But what we wanted to do is give them something tangible that they could start looking at and start providing feedback to us, and start the conversation about what's wrong, what needs to change, how can we make this better. And at the same time, we had a group of early adopters, were driving examiners chosen for their various kind of levels of digital kind of confidence, and they were from across the UK. And we brought them to Nottingham. We conducted workshops with them. We essentially made them an extended part of our team. So we had 20 to start off with, and that grew to 40 as the project kind of developed. And they were able to provide us with feedback and help us conduct usability testing. And we'd have bi-weekly calls with them to find out what's happening in their test center, how people were getting on, help us iron out problems. And we also used that then as a way to actually conduct research and find out where the lowest levels of confidence were across the country, and make sure that we actually visited those users in those areas to understand what challenges they had. And the project went really well. We got some fantastic feedback from the government digital services, which monitor all software that's been developed within the public sector. We got 100% user adoption. So even though we had those 1 in 6 that were low in confidence, and a lot of that was because as we were going about doing all this stuff, we were sharing it. So we were involving them in that process. We helped the VSA to create a Yammer site, which had lots of traction. There's a lot of interest in this across the agency. And when they could see that actually we'd been to Manchester and we were there at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, turning up with giant Post-it notes and bits of sellotape and working in a kind of co-creative way with driving examiners to really understand what they need, I think it really helped to create a lot of buy-in. And in many ways, you know, we were talking earlier about this kind of qualitative approach. We had some things that came out of the early stages. So I met a driving examiner in Glasgow, and he said, the challenge that you've got here, Paul, I can't do a Scottish accent, by the way, I'll try, is you've got to design something that works for blind dinosaurs with sausage fingers. And that became a kind of principle. You know, all design decisions thereafter, we'd measure it against this quote that was given by a driving examiner, and other driving examiners could relate to that. They could understand what was needed. So for us, that was a brilliant example of how human-centered design and co-creation can work to make things easier for people.
Yes, and create advocates and champions for the eventual rollout once you get there. Thank you. I realise that we're probably coming up towards time, so I'm going to flip to Emma, who will probably then pass back to Justin to wrap us up. But I love that example. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, just reflecting on this, there's a few elements in there, Paul. I mean, you know, we talk about involvement as one of the enablers of engagement. We added one extra onto the 4 enablers, and we added a 5th one, which is involvement. And we you know, in the book, we talk a lot about, you know, using the best of the world of positive psychology and design thinking. And I think, you know, there's such an interesting kind of fusion of ideas and tools and techniques, because, you know, I think, as you say, that the process itself is really engaging. Like, oh, thank goodness for that. You know, someone's asking me what I think about this, because I know, and I've just been sat here waiting for someone to notice that I've probably got some good stuff to share. It's very engaging. And there's also the point that I think is particularly relevant for employee experience, should be for all experiences, but for employee experience, which is the point of us doing this is to help people thrive in the workplace and be their best selves at work. That's why we're doing this. So it feels like there's a really great fit between, you know, my background in positive psychology and you know, dabbled in design thinking over the years many times, but I don't have any kind of formal qualifications in it. And you know, the design thinking kind of approach and mindset just feels like a really, really good fit. And I wonder if you guys had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a perfect fit. You know, I think that the design process, human-centered design, can be applied in many walks of life, even in your personal life. We all do this every day. And I think, to your point about formal qualifications and that sort of stuff, you know, it's because it's relatively new. You don't go and get an MA in it, you know, that it is happening, it is starting. I think younger people coming through will have that. But you know what, a lot of this is, you know, to say it's not rocket science, right? It's about going through a process, and Paul and I were discussing, we'll put in the notes some links. There's some really great resources and tools for people to DIY this. You know, you can go out and you can do this. There's workshops already put together for you. There's mural boards already put together for you. You just need to be the facilitator, and go through these steps, and it's not prescriptive. You can, you know, you will squiggle around, you know, it never is completely linear. But yeah, that's, I don't know if you've got anything to add to that, Paul.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes we perhaps need to simplify the way that we describe this stuff. You know, we talk about EX and UX and human-centered design, and like, what does that mean really? And essentially, it's just about solving problems. So everyone's got problems, right? So how do you solve them? What's a good process for figuring stuff out? And I mean, I think Justin gave me a bit of a big up at the beginning as design thinking dad, and essentially the concept around that is I've got 4 kids, and in my life, I guess they're my biggest pain point. So how do you solve that? You know, how do you work with them to create an awesome day when you've got 4 different opinions and 4 different views about how that day should go? So what do? You do a workshop, don't you? Of course, you pull out some Post-it notes and you get everybody to contribute their ideas, and then you map it out in a kind of loose journey map, and you stick it on a fridge and you take a picture of it, and everybody's happy. So a lot of these processes are not difficult at all. They're actually really straightforward. If a 4 or 5-year-old can do it, then why can't you do it in the office?
No, I love that, and highly recommend everyone checking out your Design Thinking Dad's video that I saw. I think was it on YouTube? So it was brilliant. Highly recommend that. Just interesting, just before we wrap up, yes, problem space, but we've kind of evolved that a bit, haven't we? Use the positive psychology kind of strength-based approach. We try and talk about opportunities. Let's find opportunities, and I think that really helps internally. People, positive psychology is a great tool to. It's a very comfortable kind of process to go through, because it's not pointing the finger and saying this is wrong and it's not working, which can feel quite aggressive sometimes. And people get very defensive about their process or their procedure, whatever it might be. So we talk about, how can we improve it? How can we find the opportunity space? So that just really helps in terms of reframing that slightly. So back over to you, B, just to summarize and finish up then.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, I've just absolutely loved the conversation. I love talking. I like to think I'm a student of design thinking, and just every time we have these conversations, I learn more and more. So I think, yeah, absolutely. I love that standing in the squiggle. I think there's so much richness here, and there's so much that people can go and just experiment with. I don't think you can necessarily break anything or go wrong. So thank you so much for sharing. It's been great having you here. Justin, any final thoughts from you?
Thank you, Belinda. Yes, I have a final thought and I have a final quote. And the quote I'd like to share with you has just been prompted by Anita in the chat, who said, keep interest and curiosity open. So, Kerry, you probably know this one, but I'm going to finish with an Einstein quote, which is, I have no particular talent, I am only passionately curious. It's good enough for Einstein. It's good enough for us. Thanks again to Kerrie Hughes and Paul Bailey from Sparck for joining us. Thanks to our live studio audience for getting involved and enriching the conversation. Next up, friends, on the Reset Show on Wednesday, the 24th of March, is Getting Started with Employee Experience, where we'll be joined by, amongst others, a special guest, James Hampton from Sea Salt. And a brief plug, if you haven't already subscribed, please do. Apart from being the first to know about upcoming shows, you will also receive the vital follow-up resource packs that I know in the chat people have been very keen to get a hold of. So that's some links and resources that we put together, curated by Katie, with some input from our guests in terms of further reading, further listening, further watching. So you get all of that goodie bag sent to you as well, but only if you subscribe. And as a special request, if you are listening to the podcast, if you like what you're hearing, please take a moment to like and rate the show, as it's super helpful for us to reach more people, share the love and these great conversations. that is it from us for this episode. Thank you so much for joining us. Go well, and we will see you next time. Bye for now.